It was the royal wedding of the decade, and the world watched with bated breath as Princess Margaret, the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II, stepped into a fairy tale of her own making. The young princess, known for her beauty, charm, and undeniable spirit, was about to marry Lord Snowdon, a talented photographer. Their union was heralded as a match made in heaven, a story of romance that would capture the hearts of millions. But what began as a dream, a love story meant to defy the odds, would soon unravel in a way that no one could have predicted. Margaret's wedding, held on May 6, 1960, at Westminster Abbey, was nothing short of spectacular. The guests were a mix of aristocrats, celebrities, and royalty, all gathered to witness the union of two vastly different worlds. The princess, with her fairy tale grace, walked down the aisle in a gown designed by Norman Hartnell, looking every bit the part of a princess who had found her happily ever after. Lord Snowdon, on the other hand, was a commoner, a photographer who had found himself swept into the world of royal privilege and responsibility. Together, they seemed the perfect couple, a young woman of royal blood and a man whose talent and vision had earned him a place in her life. The couple's courtship had been unconventional by royal standards. While the British royal family was accustomed to the idea of marrying within the aristocracy, Margaret chose to follow her heart, defying the rules of tradition. Lord Snowdon, despite his humble background, had captured her attention with his creativity and wit. Their relationship was often described as passionate, and there was no doubt that Margaret was deeply in love with her future husband. But their story, though full of promise, was marred by complexities that neither of them could have foreseen. As the months passed, cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect union. The realities of royal life, with its duties, expectations, and the ever-present gaze of the public, weighed heavily on Margaret. The pressures of being a royal princess, a symbol of grace and decorum, were not easily reconciled with the free-spirited and independent nature of her new husband. While Margaret dutifully attended to her royal responsibilities, Lord Snowdon found himself increasingly restless, struggling to fit into a world that was foreign to him. His career as a photographer, while successful, often took him away from his wife, and the separation began to take its toll. The tabloids, ever eager to capitalize on the royals' private lives, began to turn their attention to the couple. The press scrutinized every move, dissecting their body language and relationships. What had been a fairy tale wedding soon became the subject of scandalous rumors. Margaret's once joyful demeanor began to fade, replaced by an air of sadness that the public could not ignore. Her husband's increasing infidelities and the pressure of living under the royal microscope began to erode the foundation of their marriage. The couple's differences became more apparent with each passing year. Margaret, bound by the rules and obligations of the royal family, was expected to be the perfect princess, constantly in the public eye. Lord Snowdon, on the other hand, was an artist, a man who thrived on freedom and creativity. The tension between their worlds was palpable, and it became clear that their marriage was struggling under the weight of these disparities. The love that had once been so strong was now overshadowed by misunderstandings and unmet expectations. In 1976, after years of growing distance, Margaret and Snowdon announced their separation. It was a heartbreaking admission that their fairy tale had come to an end. The media had a field day with the news, and the public's fascination with the breakdown of their marriage only grew. The once glamorous couple, who had been the toast of the town, were now subjects of pity and gossip. The pain of their separation was not just personal, it was public, and the world watched as their fairy tale turned tragic. While Snowdon moved on with his life, marrying again in 1978 to Lucy Lindsay Hogg, Margaret's life seemed to spiral into isolation. Her health began to decline, and the woman who had once been known for her beauty and vibrant personality became a shadow of her former self. The emotional toll of her failed marriage, coupled with the unrelenting scrutiny of the press, weighed heavily on her. She withdrew from the public eye, choosing to spend her time in the quieter corners of her world, far removed from the media circus that had once celebrated her. The toll on Margaret's health was significant. In the late 1980s, she suffered a series of strokes that left her physically and emotionally drained. The public, always eager to watch the royals in their moments of vulnerability, now saw Margaret as a frail figure, struggling to come to terms with the pain that had defined much of her adult life. Her appearance had changed, and the once vibrant princess who had captivated the world with her charm and elegance was now a fragile woman, weighed down by years of heartache. Despite her personal struggles, Margaret continued to fulfill her royal duties as best as she could. But it was clear that the spark that had once defined her had dimmed. She no longer exuded the same joy and energy that had once made her the life of the party. Her smile, though still present on occasion, no longer reached her eyes. The fairy tale had long been over, and Margaret was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered by the harsh realities of love, loss, and public scrutiny. Margaret's story was not one of a happy ending, but rather one of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. She had once dreamed of a life filled with love and happiness, but instead she was forced to contend with the complexities of being a royal, the pressures of living under the media's gaze, and the heartbreak of a marriage that had fallen apart. The public's fascination with her story, though driven by gossip and scandal, also reflected the universal struggles of love and loss that we all face. As Margaret grew older, she became more reclusive, choosing to spend her final years away from the spotlight. The woman who had once been the darling of the royal family and the press was now a figure whose health and well-being were closely monitored by the public. The world had witnessed her rise, her fall, and her attempts to rebuild, but in the end, Princess Margaret's legacy was one of a woman who had loved deeply, suffered greatly, and despite it all, continued to carry on with grace and dignity. Princess Margaret's final years were defined not by the glamorous royal events she had once attended, but by a quiet existence away from the public eye. As the world's spotlight shifted from her failed marriage to the younger members of the royal family, Margaret retreated into the solace of her home, away from the press and the constant scrutiny that had been a part of her life for so long. But despite her withdrawal, the echoes of her past, particularly the tragedy of her marriage to Lord Snowdon, lingered in the hearts of those who remembered her as the vivacious princess once destined for greatness. By the late 1980s, Princess Margaret's health began to decline, and it became clear that the once lively and charming princess was now a frail version of herself. The strokes she suffered left her physically debilitated, and though she still attended royal functions, it was evident that the sparkle that had once defined her had diminished. She was often seen in public with a somber expression, her movements slower, her smile less frequent. The woman who had once been the center of attention at every royal event now seemed to be fading into the shadows, a figure of both strength and vulnerability. Yet, even in the face of declining health, Margaret continued to show her resilience. Despite the emotional toll of her failed marriage, she remained dutiful to her royal obligations. She continued to perform her royal duties, albeit with increasing difficulty. Her legacy was no longer just about being the rebellious princess who had chosen to marry a commoner, but rather the woman who, despite personal turmoil, had continued to serve her country with unwavering loyalty. It was this strength, her ability to carry on despite the personal heartache, that defined the final chapter of her life. Lord Snowdon, too, had moved on from their failed marriage. His remarriage in 1978 to Lucy Lindsay Hogg signaled his attempt to rebuild his life. The public perception of him, however, was never quite the same. While he continued to have a successful career as a photographer, he was forever associated with the collapse of his marriage to Princess Margaret. Many still blamed him for the pain she had suffered. And though he tried to move forward, the ghosts of his past always lingered. His second marriage was quieter, far removed from the public's eye, and he focused on his career and family. Despite her attempts to live privately, Princess Margaret's life continued to be the subject of media fascination. The British tabloids, which had been relentless in their pursuit of stories about her troubled marriage, did not let up in their scrutiny. As her health declined, there was an ever-present curiosity about her well-being, and the press closely followed her every move. Yet Margaret never gave in to the media's demands for her to open up. She remained fiercely private about her personal life, unwilling to reveal the depth of her pain or the toll her marriage had taken on her. In her later years, Margaret found solace in the company of her family, particularly her sister, Queen Elizabeth II. The bond between the two sisters, though complicated by their different royal roles, remained strong. Queen Elizabeth had always been the stable anchor in Margaret's life, offering support in times of crisis. Despite their differences in personality and lifestyle, the two shared a deep familial love and respect. It was in the comfort of her sister's company that Margaret found moments of peace away from the pressures of the public. Margaret's final years were also marked by her increasing reclusiveness. She spent much of her time at her private residences, and her appearances at public events became rarer. The press that had once followed her every step now seemed to lose interest as she faded from the spotlight. But for those who had known her personally, Margaret's life was a complex mix of contradictions, brilliant and bold in her youth, yet deeply scarred by the failures of her personal life. In the early 2000s, as Margaret's health continued to worsen, she became less and less visible. Her public appearances were few and far between, and those who did see her noticed how frail she had become. Despite her physical decline, however, Margaret remained a regal figure, carrying herself with the same grace that had once made her a star. But her life was no longer defined by her marriage, or even by her royal duties. It was, instead, a life marked by reflection, by the quiet understanding that her dreams had not materialized as she had once hoped. On February 9, 2002, Princess Margaret passed away at the age of 71. Her death marked the end of an era, and the world mourned the loss of the last member of the royal family who had been born into a world of glamour and privilege, only to see it turn into a personal tragedy. Her death was a quiet one, a reflection of the years of emotional turmoil she had endured. Yet even in death, Margaret's legacy lived on, not just as the sister of a queen, but as a woman who had defied expectations, struggled with love and loss, and found strength in her vulnerability. The story of Princess Margaret is one of heartache and resilience. It is a story of a woman who, despite the fairy tale wedding, faced the harsh realities of love, betrayal, and the public's insatiable curiosity. It is a tale of how the pressures of royal life and personal expectations can lead to a life of quiet sorrow, even for someone born into such privilege. But it is also a story of a woman who, despite her challenges, remained a beloved figure in the eyes of her family and the public. The tragedy of her marriage to Lord Snowdon will forever be part of her story. But so too will her strength, her grace, and the indomitable spirit that carried her through her darkest times. If you were touched by the story of Princess Margaret's life, please leave a like on this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more royal stories filled with inspiration and emotion.